For 40 years, an old man lived next door to me. My son and daughter-in-law hated him with a passion I never understood. They built a 10-foot fence to block him out. They sued him 3 times in civil court. He is dangerous, they told me over and over again. He is a threat to this family. But when he died last week, I was the only person at his funeral. The rain was soaking through my coat, while my son was back at the house, likely popping a bottle of champagne to celebrate. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the war was over. Then the lawyer handed me a thick envelope and said, "Mr. Bennett, you have no idea who your neighbor really was." I opened that envelope and my knees nearly gave out. My children called him a monster, but as I read the documents, I realized the real monsters had been sleeping under my roof the entire time. Before I continue this story, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this old man share the truth. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Harrison Bennett. I am 70 years old, and I spent 40 years of my life working as a structural engineer. I built bridges that can withstand hurricanes and skyscrapers that don't sway in the wind. I know how to spot a weak foundation. I know when a structure is about to collapse. But I never saw the cracks in my own family until it was too late. It started on a Tuesday afternoon about 6 months ago. I was coming back from my physical therapy appointment. My arthritis has been giving me hell lately, especially in the hips, but I still drive myself. I still value my independence. As I pulled my old Ford truck into the long driveway, I saw it. It was like a scar across the beautiful landscape of Pennsylvania. A massive construction crew was in the backyard. They were sinking posts into the ground. Heavy pressure-treated posts. They were erecting a solid wood fence painted a matte black that seemed to absorb the sunlight. It was at least 10 feet high. It sliced right through the shared green space between my property and the house next door. The garden I had tended for decades was being cut in half. I parked the truck and got out as fast as my stiff legs would allow. The sound of nail guns was deafening. But over the noise of the construction, I heard a voice I had grown to dread. It was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was standing on the patio holding her phone up with that ring light attachment she carries everywhere. She is 29 years old and calls herself a lifestyle influencer. She was screaming at the screen. "Guys, I am literally shaking right now. We have to take extreme measures to protect this household. We are putting up this barrier because we have no choice. We are living next to a predator." I stood there leaning on my cane watching her perform. She squeezed out a fake tear and wiped it away carefully so she wouldn't smudge her eyeliner. Standing right next to her was my son, Preston. He is 32 years old, and seeing him there made my stomach turn. He was holding a clipboard and talking to the foreman. I walked up to them. The grass was muddy from the construction boots. "Preston, what is going on here? Why are you building a fortress in the backyard?" Preston jumped a little. He always was jumpy when I caught him off guard. He adjusted his expensive watch. A watch I knew he bought on credit because he hasn't sold a house in 6 months. "Dad, you are back early. Look, we didn't want to worry you. We are just handling a security issue." Security issue. I looked at the black wall. It was ugly. It was aggressive. And it was expensive. I know what lumber costs these days. "How much is this costing, Preston?" He tried to dodge the question. He started talking about safety and peace of mind. But I saw the checkbook in his hand. It was the blue joint account checkbook, the one that holds my pension deposits. I snatched the clipboard from the foreman before Preston could stop me. I looked at the invoice. $5,000. My blood ran cold. "Preston, this is the money I transferred to you last week. This was for the roof repairs. The shingles are falling off the garage. You told me the roof was leaking." Preston snatched the clipboard back. His face was red, but not from shame. It was from anger. "The roof can wait, Dad. This is a priority. You don't understand the threat we are under." Tiffany ended her live stream and walked over. Her face changed instantly from the scared victim she was playing for her followers to the cold, hard woman she really is. "Harrison, stop making a scene in front of the workers. We are doing this for you too, although you are probably too senile to appreciate it." I straightened my back. I might be old, and my joints might ache, but my mind is as sharp as the steel beams I used to inspect. I am not senile, Tiffany, and this is my house. I did not approve this. She laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. "Actually, Dad, it isn't your house anymore. Or did you forget?" The words hit me like a physical blow because she was right. 2 years ago, when my wife Sarah passed away, I was in a dark place. I was grieving. I was vulnerable. Preston and Tiffany convinced me that the taxes and the maintenance of the main house were too much for me. They said they would take over the burden. They suggested I move into the guest house at the back of the property. It is a nice cottage, fully independent. They said they would handle the main estate and I could just relax. I signed the deed over to Preston. I thought I was securing their future. I didn't know I was signing away my dignity. "Technically, the main house belongs to us, Harrison," Tiffany said, crossing her arms. "And we have the right to secure our perimeter." "Secure it from what?" I pointed my cane toward the house next door. "From Gus. Are you insane?" Augustus Wainwright, or Gus as I have called him for 40 years, lived in the small brick house next door. He was 75. He was a quiet man, a solitary man. He moved in around the same time Sarah and I did. We borrowed sugar from each other. We waved when we got the mail. He was a retired actuary or something boring like that. He kept to himself. Tiffany stepped closer to me. Her perfume was overpowering. "You don't know what he does when you aren't looking. He watches me, Harrison. When I am trying to sunbathe by the pool to create content for my brand, he is there. He watches me through the hedges. I saw a glint of light yesterday. He was using binoculars. He is a pervert." I looked at my son. Preston nodded vigorously, like a bobblehead doll. "It is true, Dad." Tiffany felt unsafe. "We can't have a peeping Tom next door. He is dangerous." I felt a surge of rage I hadn't felt in years. This was absurd. "Gus has cataracts, Preston. The man can barely see his own mailbox. He stopped driving 3 years ago because he couldn't read the street signs." "You are telling me he is spying on her with high-powered binoculars?" "You are naive, Dad," Preston said dismissively. "He plays the frail old man card, but he is sharp, and he is obsessed with Tiffany." I turned away from them and walked toward the fence line. The workers hadn't finished the last section yet. There was still a gap about 2 feet wide. I looked through it into Gus's yard. And there he was, the dangerous predator. Gus was sitting in his wheelchair on his back patio. He had a blanket over his legs even though it was a mild afternoon. He was holding a garden hose with a shaking hand trying to water his prize-winning rose bushes. He wasn't looking at our pool. He wasn't looking at our house. He was squinting at a red rose trying to make sure he didn't drown it. He looked smaller than I remembered. Frailer. He wore thick glasses that made his eyes look huge and distorted. He looked like a man who was fading away, not a man who was hunting anyone. I turned back to my son and his wife. "He is watering his roses, Preston. He is in a wheelchair." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "That is just his cover. He saw the fence going up and he is acting innocent. But we know. And now my followers know too. 5,000 people just watched me expose him." I looked at the phone in her hand. She had just destroyed a man's reputation to 5,000 strangers based on a lie. And she used my money to build a monument to that lie. "This is wrong," I said, my voice trembling. "You are stealing my money to build a spite fence against a helpless old man." Preston stepped forward and put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and condescending. Dad, go back to the guest house. Take your nap. Let us handle the real world. You are getting confused again. Maybe we need to talk to Dr. Evans about your dosage. There it was. The threat. The subtle hint that if I pushed too hard, they would claim I was losing my mind. They had done it before when I asked about the bank statements. I pulled away from his hand. I am not taking a nap, and I want that money back in the account by Friday, Preston, or we are going to have a very different conversation. I walked away toward the guest house. My back was burning with pain, but I refused to limp. I could hear the nail guns starting up again. Bang, 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 sealing off the view, sealing off the truth. I went into my small cottage and locked the door. I went straight to the window that faced Gus's yard. The black fence was almost done. It loomed over Gus's garden, casting a long, dark shadow over his roses. I saw Gus look up. He seemed confused by the sudden darkness. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the wall. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. He looked lonely. I sat down in my armchair and watched him until the workers finished the last plank. The view was gone. All I could see was black wood. My phone pinged. It was a notification from our Neighborhood Homeowners Association app. Tiffany had posted a link to her live stream. The caption read, "Warning to all neighbors. We have a predator in our midst. Please protect your children and wives." The comments were already rolling in. People saying they always knew there was something off about Gus. People saying he should be locked up. People I had known for decades were turning on him instantly. I felt sick. This wasn't just a fence, this was a declaration of war. And my son and daughter-in-law were the aggressors. But as I sat there watching the sun go down over that ugly black wall, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let them destroy that old man. They thought I was just a guest in my own home. They thought I was a confused old retiree they could bully. They were about to find out that a structural engineer knows exactly where to apply pressure to make the whole house of cards come down. But I didn't know then just how far they would go. I didn't know that a fence was the least of Gus's problems. The real danger was just beginning. The week after the black wall went up, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed from quiet suspicion to open hostility. Tiffany was not satisfied with just blocking the view. She wanted to destroy the man on the other side. She spent her mornings on the Community Homeowners Association page and the local next-door group. She typed with a fury I had never seen before. She called Gus a predator. She called him a threat to the safety of the children in the cul-de-sac. She never used the word alleged. She stated it as fact. I watched from my guest house window as the consequences of her lies unfolded in real time. It started with the trash. I saw Mrs. Higgins, who lives 3 houses down, walking her dog. She is a woman I have known since the 80s. A woman who bakes cookies for the fire department. She stopped in front of Gus's house. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she picked up a plastic bag of dog waste and hurled it over Gus's low chain-link fence. It landed right in the middle of his pristine driveway. An hour later, a group of teenagers drove by. They slowed down and threw empty soda cans and fast food wrappers into his yard. They yelled things I won't repeat. My son Preston stood on the porch of the main house watching it happen. He wasn't stopping them. He was smiling. He was holding a beer and nodding as if justice was being served. I felt a bile rise in my throat. This was my house, my neighborhood, and my family had turned it into a war zone against a 75-year-old man in a wheelchair. I couldn't stay silent inside my cottage anymore. I had to see Gus. I had to apologize. I waited until late afternoon. Preston and Tiffany had left in my car to go to a high-end furniture store. They were shopping for a new patio set to match their new fence. As soon as their taillights disappeared around the corner, I grabbed a jar of homemade apple butter I had canned the previous autumn. It wasn't much, but it was a peace offering. I didn't walk through the main gate. I didn't want the neighbors to see me. I felt like a criminal in my own community. I slipped through the backwoods path that connected our lots, a path the boys used to use as a shortcut when they were kids. I approached Gus's back door. The house was modest. The brick was chipping in places and the gutters needed cleaning. It looked like the home of a man who couldn't keep up with the maintenance anymore. I knocked on the screen door. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I expected him to yell at me. I expected him to tell me to get off his property. Instead, the inner door opened slowly. Gus sat there in his wheelchair. He looked tired. His skin was gray and papery, but his eyes behind those thick glasses were calm. "Harrison," he said softly, "you are risking a lot coming here. Your daughter-in-law has eyes everywhere." I held up the apple butter. My hand was shaking. "I am so sorry, Gus," I said. "I am so sorry about the fence, about the lies, about the trash in your driveway." He sighed, a sound that rattled in his chest, and unlocked the door. "Come in, Harry, before the neighbors start throwing rocks at you, too." I stepped inside. The interior of his house surprised me. I expected the clutter of an old, lonely man. I expected dusty newspapers and dirty dishes. But the house was spotless. It was almost clinical. There was very little furniture, just a single armchair, a small table, and shelves. Wall-to-wall shelves. They were packed with books. I glanced at the spines as I walked to the kitchen. The shelves were packed, not with westerns, but with heavy technical manuals on cybersecurity and hacking. Not exactly light reading for a retiree. Gus saw me looking. "Hobbies," he said simply. "A man needs to keep his mind sharp when his legs fail him." He poured us both a cup of tea from a kettle on the stove. His hands shook terribly as he held the cups, but he didn't spill a drop. We sat at his small kitchen table. "Why aren't you fighting back, Gus?" I asked. "Why don't you tell them it is a lie?" He took a sip of tea. "Who would believe me, Harry? She is young. She is pretty. She has 5,000 followers on the internet. I am just a creepy old man in a wheelchair. If I fight back, it just gives her more content. It feeds the fire." "But the binoculars," I pressed. "She said she saw you. She swore she saw the glint of the lens. She said you were zooming in on her." Gus chuckled. It was a dry, sad sound. "Wait here." He wheeled himself into the living room. I heard him rummaging in a drawer. A moment later, he came back holding a black plastic device. It had two long metal prongs sticking out of the bottom and a digital dial on the top. It was shaped vaguely like a pair of field glasses if you were looking from a distance and didn't know any better. "This is what she saw," he said, placing it on the table. I picked it up. It was a digital soil moisture meter. I had seen them at the hardware store. You stick the prongs into the dirt to see if your plants need water. "My roses are finicky," Gus explained. "If the soil gets too dry, the roots rot." I was checking the moisture levels near the property line. The sun hits that spot the hardest. I wasn't looking at your daughter-in-law, Harry. I was looking at the dirt. I can barely see past the end of my nose. Why would I want to look at her? I stared at the device. It was harmless. It was a gardening tool. And Tiffany had turned it into a weapon to destroy a man's life. "Can I borrow this?" I asked. Gus nodded. "Take it. But it won't matter. You can't use logic to fight Crazy Harry." I left his house feeling a cold fury building in my gut. I walked back through the woods clutching the moisture meter like it was a grenade. I was going to blow their lies apart. When I got back to the main house, Preston and Tiffany were in the kitchen. They were unpacking boxes of expensive patio cushions, beige linen, $500 a pillow. They looked up when I stormed in. "Where have you been, Dad?" Preston asked. "We brought you takeout. It is on the counter." I ignored the food. I walked right up to the granite island and slammed the moisture meter down on the surface. The plastic clattered loudly. "This is it!" I shouted. "This is your smoking gun!" Tiffany looked at the device, then looked at me with a bored expression. "What is that piece of junk, Harrison?" "It is a soil moisture meter, Tiffany," I said, my voice rising. "I went to Gus's house. He showed me. This is what he was holding. He was checking his roses. He wasn't looking at you. He wasn't spying. He was gardening." I pushed the device toward her. "There are no lenses. There is no zoom. You destroyed a man's reputation over a gardening tool. You have to take down those posts. You have to apologize." I expected her to be embarrassed. I expected her to try to make an excuse to say she made a mistake. I was ready to forgive a mistake. But Tiffany didn't blink. She didn't even look at the meter. She looked me dead in the eye, and a slow, cold smile spread across her face. "It doesn't matter what it is, Harrison." I froze. "What do you mean it doesn't matter? It proves he is innocent." She laughed and picked up a piece of sushi. "The truth is irrelevant, Dad. What matters is that people believe he is dangerous. The neighbors are united now. We are the leaders of this community because we took a stand. My follower count is up 20% since I posted that story. We are safe because people think we were in danger." She looked at Preston. "Tell him, babe." Preston wouldn't look at me. He was studying the label on a soy sauce packet. "She is right, Dad. Even if it wasn't binoculars this time, he is still weird. He is still a creep. The fence stays. The lawsuit stays. We can't look weak now. If we admit we were wrong, we look like idiots. We have to double down." I looked at my son, the boy I raised to tell the truth, the boy I taught to stand up for the weak. He was gone. He was replaced by this spineless man who cared more about his wife's Instagram fame than an old man's life. "You are monsters," I whispered. "Both of you. You are destroying an innocent man for clicks and likes." Tiffany's face hardened. The smile vanished. "Careful, Harrison. You are sounding hysterical. Maybe you are the one who is confused. Maybe we need to call the doctor and tell him you are having episodes again. Agitation is a sign of dementia, you know." She leaned over the counter. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "And remember whose house you are standing in. You are a guest here. If you want to side with the enemy, you can go sleep in his yard. But as long as you are under my roof, you will support this family. Do you understand?" I looked at the moisture meter sitting on the counter. It was a symbol of truth. And in this house, truth was trash. I understood perfectly. I grabbed the meter and turned around. "I understand that I am alone here," I said quietly. I walked out the back door. I could hear Tiffany laughing as I left. She thought she had won. She thought she had silenced me. But as I walked back to my guest house in the dark, clutching that piece of plastic, I realized Gus was right. Logic wouldn't work. Decency wouldn't work. If I wanted to save Gus, if I wanted to save myself, I had to stop playing by the rules. I had to become dangerous too. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. On Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on the small porch of my guest house trying to read a paperback novel, but my eyes kept drifting to the main yard. The grass was perfectly manicured. The new patio furniture was arranged like a showroom display, and running around in circles yapping at invisible squirrels was Princess. Princess was Tiffany's dog. She was a Pomeranian, a ball of orange fluff that cost $3,000. Tiffany treated that dog better than she treated most human beings. She carried it in designer bags. She fed it organic salmon. It was her prop, her baby. I watched as the dog trotted toward the new black fence. She stopped near the corner where the wood met the ground. She sniffed at something in the grass. Then she started eating. I stood up. I squinted, trying to see what it was. Before I could call out, the dog stopped chewing. She let out a high-pitched yelp that sounded like a siren. Then she fell onto her side. Her little legs started kicking frantically in the air. White foam began to bubble around her muzzle. The back door of the main house flew open. Tiffany burst out. She wasn't holding her phone this time. She was screaming. It was a raw, primal sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. She ran to the dog and fell to her knees in the grass. "Princess. Oh God, Princess, breathe." Preston came running out after her. He looked panicked. "What is happening? What is wrong with her?" Tiffany pointed a manicured finger toward the black fence. Lying in the grass just inches from the dog's nose was a chunk of raw meat. It looked like hamburger meat mixed with something blue. "He poisoned her." Tiffany shrieked. Her voice echoed off the neighboring houses. "He threw it over the fence. That monster killed my baby." She didn't grab the dog and run to the car to go to the vet. She didn't try to wash the dog's mouth out. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed 3 numbers. 911. "I need police. I need an ambulance. My neighbor just murdered my dog." I grabbed my cane and hurried across the lawn as fast as I could. The dog was still twitching, but the seizing seemed to be slowing down. She was panting heavy, shallow breaths. "Take her to the vet, Preston," I yelled. "Don't wait for the police. Go now." Preston looked at me, then at Tiffany. He was frozen. He didn't move until Tiffany gave the order. "Go start the car," she snapped. "But leave the meat. We need evidence." Preston ran to the garage. I stood over the dog. I looked at the fence. It was 10 feet tall. Gus was in a wheelchair. He had weak arms. There was no way he could have hurled a pound of raw meat over a 10-foot wall with enough force to clear the structure and land right there. It was physically impossible. But logic didn't matter. Not when the sirens started wailing. 2 patrol cars screeched into the driveway. A sheriff's deputy I didn't recognize jumped out, his hand resting on his holster. "Where is the offender, ma'am?" he asked Tiffany. She pointed a shaking hand at Gus's house. "In there. He is in there, laughing about it. He has been harassing us for weeks, and now he threw poisoned meat into my yard." The deputy signaled his partner. They marched toward Gus's front door. They didn't knock. They pounded. "Police! Open up!" I hobbled after them. "Officer, wait!" I shouted. "He is an old man. He is disabled." They ignored me. The door opened and I saw Gus. He was wearing his pajamas. He looked terrified. He was gripping the wheels of his chair, his knuckles white. "Step out of the house, sir," the deputy barked. "I can't step anywhere," Gus stammered. "I am in a chair." The deputy reached in and grabbed the handle of the wheelchair. He didn't push it gently. He yanked it. He dragged Gus out onto the porch like he was hauling out a sack of trash. The chair hit the doorframe and Gus nearly fell out. "What is this about?" Gus cried out. "What did I do?" "You know what you did," Tiffany screamed from the yard. "You murderer!" I couldn't watch this. I moved between the deputy and Gus. I planted my feet and raised my cane, not as a weapon, but as a barrier. "Stop! I've been watching all day." He threw nothing. Tiffany ran over. Her face was streaked with mascara. "He is lying," she screamed. "He is covering for him. My father-in-law is confused, officer. He has dementia. He doesn't know what day it is half the time." I turned to look at her. The audacity took my breath away. "I do not have dementia, Tiffany, and I know exactly what I saw. Or rather, what I didn't see." Preston appeared from the garage. He had put the dog in the car, but he hadn't left yet. He ran over when he heard me defending Gus. He got right in my face. His eyes were wild. "Dad, shut up." He hissed, "Just shut up." I looked at my son. I will not shut up, Preston. You are letting them treat Gus like a criminal. Look at him. He is terrified. Preston shoved me. It wasn't a gentle nudge. He placed both hands on my chest and pushed with force. I stumbled back. My heel caught in the thick grass and I went down hard. My hip hit the ground with a sickening thud. Pain exploded in my lower back. I lay there in the grass looking up at my son. He was towering over me, breathing hard. He didn't offer me a hand. He didn't look sorry. He looked hateful. You are senile, old man, he shouted so the neighbors could hear. You are defending a dog killer over your own family, over your future grandchild. The yard went silent. Even the police officers looked uncomfortable. Grandchild, I whispered. Tiffany isn't pregnant. But Preston was playing a card he knew would garner sympathy. He was painting me as the monster who cared more about a neighbor than the safety of a baby that didn't even exist yet. Get him out of here, Tiffany said coldly to the police. He is interfering with an investigation. The deputy looked at me on the ground, then at Gus shivering in his wheelchair. He seemed to realize that the situation was messy, too messy for an immediate arrest. He released his grip on Gus's chair. We are going to take a report, he said. We will take the meat for testing. If it comes back as poison, we will be back with a warrant. He pointed a finger at Gus. Don't leave town, and stay away from the fence. They took statements. They took photos of the meat. They watched Preston drive the dog away, and then they left. I was still sitting in the grass. It took me a long time to get up. My hip was throbbing. I used my cane to lever myself upright. Preston and Tiffany went back inside their big house, slamming the door behind them. They didn't look back to see if I was injured. I limped over to Gus. He was still sitting on his porch, staring at the tire marks the police car had left on his lawn. He looked smaller than ever. Defeated. Gus, I said. I am sorry. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet behind the thick lenses, but there was no anger in them. Only a deep, profound pity. You can't win, Harry, he said softly. His voice trembled. You tried to stand up for me, and your son pushed you into the dirt. They have no souls, Harry. They are empty. He turned his wheelchair around and struggled to get it back over the threshold of his door. Go back to your cottage, he said without looking back, before they decide to put you in a home. I watched his door close. I heard the lock click. I walked back to my guest house. Every step was agony, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold realization settling in my chest. My son had put his hands on me. He had used violence to silence the truth. I went inside and sat in the dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want them to see me. I rubbed my hip and stared at the main house. The lights were on in the kitchen. I could see Tiffany pouring a glass of wine. She looked calm. She looked satisfied. The dog would be fine. I knew that in my gut. Just like I knew Gus hadn't thrown that meat. It was theater. Cruel, dangerous theater. But Gus was wrong about one thing. He said I couldn't win. He didn't know that I had spent 40 years calculating stress loads and breaking points. I knew that every structure, no matter how imposing, has a weakness. I just had to find theirs. And tonight, as my hip throbbed and my heart broke, I started to see the cracks. The week following the incident with the police was unnaturally quiet. It was the silence of a predator waiting in the tall grass. I stayed in my guest house, mostly nursing my bruised hip and watching Gus through the window. He barely moved. He sat in his living room with the curtains drawn just a crack. He looked like a prisoner in his own home. And in a way, he was. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a sedan pulled up to Gus's curb. A man in a cheap suit got out holding a thick manila envelope. He walked up the path and banged on the door. I watched as Gus opened it. The man shoved the papers into Gus's trembling hands, said something brief, and walked away. A process server. My son had not just built a fence. He had launched a legal missile. I found the copy of the lawsuit sitting on the kitchen counter in the main house later that afternoon. I had gone in to get my mail while Preston and Tiffany were out. It was right there next to the fruit bowl. I put on my reading glasses and felt my blood pressure rise with every line I read. It was a civil suit filed in the county court. The plaintiff was Tiffany Bennett. The defendant was Augustus Wainwright. The cause of action was intentional infliction of emotional distress. They claimed Gus had engaged in a campaign of psychological terror, stalking, and harassment that had caused Tiffany severe anxiety, sleeplessness, and trauma. And then I saw the number. They were demanding $50,000 in damages. Not $1 million. Not $10,000. Exactly $50,000. It was a specific number, a calculated number. In my line of work, when you see a specific number like that, it is not random. It corresponds to a load-bearing capacity. It corresponds to a debt. I heard the garage door open. Preston was home. I quickly put the papers back exactly where I found them and moved into the hallway. I stood in the shadows of the pantry, just like I used to when the boys were teenagers and trying to sneak in past curfew. But this time I wasn't catching a teenager with beer on his breath. I was catching a grown man in a lie. Preston walked into the kitchen. He was on his phone. He sounded frantic. He was pacing back and forth, his expensive Italian loafers clicking on the tile. "I know the deadline, Tony. You don't have to threaten me. I am good for it." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. His face was pale and sweaty. "Look, the crypto market crashed, okay? Everyone took a hit. I just need a few more weeks. I have a liquidity event coming up, a lawsuit settlement. It is practically guaranteed. The guy is old, he won't fight it. He will settle just to make it go away." I held my breath. A liquidity event. He was talking about Gus. He was talking about destroying a man's life to cover a gambling debt. $50,000, Preston said into the phone. "That covers the 45 I owe you plus the vigorish. Just call off your guys. I don't want anyone showing up at my house. My dad is here and he is nosy." He hung up the phone and leaned against the counter, exhaling a long, shaky breath. He looked terrified, but he didn't look guilty. He looked like a man who had found a solution to his problem, and that solution was the old man next door. Then Tiffany walked in from the living room. She was wearing her yoga clothes, holding a green smoothie. She didn't look traumatized. She didn't look like a woman suffering from severe emotional distress. She looked bored. "Did you talk to the bookie?" she asked casually, taking a sip of her drink. "Yeah," Preston said, wiping his forehead. "He gave us until the end of the month. The lawsuit has to pay out by then." "It will," Tiffany said. "We just need to turn up the heat. If he doesn't settle, we move to phase 2. Phase 2. I stepped out from the pantry. My cane hit the floor with a loud thwack. Both of them jumped. Preston nearly dropped his phone. "Dad," he stammered. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to know that Tony isn't a business associate, Preston. Long enough to know that you lost $45,000 on crypto and football games. And now you are trying to squeeze it out of Gus." Preston's face went from fear to anger in a split second. He straightened his jacket, trying to regain his composure. "You shouldn't eavesdrop, Dad. It is rude. And you don't understand modern finance. It wasn't gambling. It was high-risk investment." "It was a bet, Preston," I said, walking closer. "And you lost. And now you are suing a 75-year-old man for $50,000 to cover your losses. That is why you made up the story about the stalking. That is why you poisoned the dog. It was all a setup to get a settlement." Tiffany stepped in between us. Her eyes were cold. We didn't poison the dog, Harrison. But even if we are capitalizing on the situation, so what? That old man is sitting on a gold mine. What gold mine? I asked. He lives on a fixed income. He lives on a double lot, Preston said, his eyes lighting up with greed. I did the research, Dad. Zoning laws changed last year. If we combine his lot with our lot, we have enough square footage to build a 6-unit luxury condo complex. I already have a developer interested. Galaxy Development. They are offering $2 million for the land if we can deliver the full parcel. I stared at them. The room seemed to spin. This wasn't just about $50,000. This was about erasing everything. So that is the plan, I said, my voice quiet. You sue him until he is bankrupt. You force him to sell his house to pay the legal fees. You buy it cheap. You tear it down. And then you tear my house down too. Our house, Tiffany corrected. And yes, Harrison, that is the plan. It is called real estate development. It is how wealth is built. We are going to turn this dusty old property into millions. And what happens to Gus? I asked. What happens to the man who has lived there for 40 years? Preston shrugged, a callous movement that made me want to strike him. He goes to a home dad, or he moves to Florida. Who cares? He is dying anyway. Did you see him? He barely lasts another winter. We are just accelerating the inevitable. I looked at my son. I looked for a trace of the little boy who used to cry when he found a hurt bird in the yard. I looked for the young man who swore he wanted to make the world a better place. They were gone, consumed by debt and greed. You are monsters, I said again. I will testify against you. I will go to court and tell the judge exactly what I heard. Preston laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Go ahead, Dad. Tell them. Tell them you heard voices in the pantry. Tell them the aliens told you. We have the police report about the dog. We have Tiffany's followers. We have the narrative. You are just a confused old man who forgets to take his pills. No one will believe you. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. And you should be thanking us. Who do you think pays the electric bill for that guest house you stay in? Who pays for your food? We are doing this for you, Dad. We need this money to maintain this lifestyle, to take care of you. You are a burden, Harrison, an expensive burden, and we are just trying to keep a roof over your head. The words cut deep. They were meant to shame me into silence. They were meant to make me feel small and dependent. But instead, they sparked something else. A cold, hard realization. I wasn't a burden. I was a resource they were harvesting. And Gus was just an obstacle in their path. I gripped my cane tighter. My knuckles turned white. I am not a burden, Preston. I said, my voice steady. I paid for this house. I paid for your college. I paid for your wedding, and I am done paying. I turned around and walked out of the kitchen. Where are you going? Tiffany called out. I didn't answer. I walked out the front door. I didn't go to the guest house. I went to the street. I walked to the edge of Gus's property. The lights were off in his house. He was probably sitting in the dark, afraid to turn them on, afraid to attract attention. I knew then that I couldn't just Beniche anymore. I couldn't just witness. I had to act. Preston was right about one thing. He had a developer lined up. He had a plan. But he forgot the first rule of engineering. Before you demolish a structure, you have to make sure the foundation isn't connected to something that can bring you down with it. I took out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 20 years. It was an old friend from the city planning office. Jim, I said when he answered. It is Harrison Bennett. I need a favor. I need to see the blueprints for the drainage system in my neighborhood. specifically the property lines between Lot 42 and 43. I hung up and looked back at my house. They wanted to play dirty with real estate. They wanted to use the law as a weapon. Fine. I knew the law too, and I knew the ground beneath their feet better than they ever would. But first, I had to keep Gus alive long enough to fight back. And with a $50,000 lawsuit hanging over his head, that was going to be the hardest job of all. The legal assault didn't stop with the civil lawsuit. That was just the opening salvo designed to drain Gus's bank account. The next move was designed to break his spirit. 2 days later, Tiffany walked into the kitchen waving a blue sheet of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. She had secured a temporary restraining order. It was an ex parte hearing, which meant she went to the judge alone without Gus present to defend himself. She presented affidavits from 3 witnesses who claimed they had seen Gus behaving aggressively and making lewd gestures toward the house. I asked who these witnesses were. I knew for a fact that no one had visited us in weeks. Tiffany smiled that cold influencer smile and scrolled through her phone. They were her moderators. Women who lived in California and Texas and Florida. People who had never stepped foot in Pennsylvania but were willing to sign a legal document swearing they had witnessed Gus's behavior via live stream. It was perjury, plain and simple, but to a busy judge looking at a crying young woman, it was enough. The order was brutal in its specificity. Augustus Wainwright was ordered to stay at least 10 yards away from the plaintiff and her property line. 10 yards is 30 feet. I did the math in my head, and my stomach dropped. Gus's backyard was small. 30 feet from our shared fence line didn't just push him back from the property, it pushed him back into his own living room. The order effectively banned him from his own garden. I watched as the sheriff deputy returned. This time he had a measuring tape. He walked from the black fence into Gus's yard. He placed orange flags in the grass. One flag was right in the middle of the rose bed. Another was by the old oak tree where Gus liked to read. The deputy explained the rules to Gus, who sat in his wheelchair in the doorway, looking like he had been struck by lightning. If Gus crossed that line of orange flags, he would be arrested for violating a court order. That afternoon was the first time in 40 years that Gus didn't come out to water his roses. It was a scorching day. The sun beat down on the flowers. By evening, the heads of the roses were drooping. By the second day, the leaves were turning brown. It wasn't just plants dying. It was Gus's reason for waking up in the morning. I watched the windows of his house. The curtains remained drawn. He was obeying the law. He was dying inside his house to avoid going to jail. I couldn't stand it. I decided to go over there again to check on him to bring him some food. I walked to the gate of my guest house. I punched in the 4-digit code I had used for 2 years, 1951, the year I was born. The keypad flashed red. It beeped a harsh error tone. I tried again, thinking my fingers had slipped. Red light. Error. I tried the key. It wouldn't turn. The lock had been changed. I looked up and saw a small black dome mounted above the doorframe. A camera. A new one. Dad, don't bother. I turned around. Preston was standing on the path holding a tablet. He was tapping the screen. We upgraded the security system today, he said calmly. The old one was outdated. This is a smart system. Biometric and app-controlled. Open the gate, Preston, I said. He shook his head. I can't do that, Dad. We are in a legal battle with a dangerous individual. We have to lock down the perimeter. We can't have you wandering around and potentially compromising the case. You are vulnerable. Gus knows you are the weak link. He manipulated you with that moisture meter story. We are doing this for your protection. Protection. It was a prison sentence. So I am a prisoner now, I asked. I can't leave my own home. You aren't a prisoner, Preston said with a sigh, as if he were explaining something to a toddler. You are in a secure facility. If you need anything, just text us. We will bring you food. We will bring you your mail. But you don't need the code. You might give it to him. Or you might forget to lock the gate. We are just taking the burden off your shoulders." He tapped the tablet again. I heard the deadbolt on my door slide home with a heavy metallic clack. "Stay inside tonight, Dad. We ordered pizza. I will bring you a couple of slices later." He walked away. I stood there staring at the keypad. My own son had locked me in. He had cut off my access to the world to keep me away from the only friend I had left. I went back inside and sat by the window. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold clarity. This wasn't about safety. This was about isolation. They wanted Gus alone, and they wanted me silent. Night fell. The neighborhood went quiet. The orange flags in Gus's yard glowed faintly under the streetlights. I saw a shadow move in Gus's window. He was pacing, or rolling rather, back and forth, back and forth. I knew that pace. It was pain. Gus had severe arthritis just like me. He took strong medication for it. But I hadn't seen the pharmacy delivery van in a week, and with the lawsuit freezing his assets, he probably couldn't afford the delivery fees. He was trapped in there, hurting and alone. I went to my medicine cabinet. I took out my own supply: naproxen, glucosamine, and a bottle of prescription pain relievers I saved for the bad days. I put them all in a heavy freezer bag. I added a small flashlight and a note that just said, "Hang in there." I wrapped the whole thing in a hand towel and taped it tight with duct tape, creating a soft, heavy projectile. I waited until 2 in the morning. The lights in the main house were out. I knew Preston had installed cameras, but I also knew the blind spots. I had built this property. I knew the angles. I opened the back window of the guest house. It was small, but I could fit through. I climbed out, groaning as my hip protested. I stayed low, crawling through the decorative shrubs along the perimeter. The dew soaked my pajamas. I felt ridiculous. A 70-year-old man sneaking through his own bushes like a cat burglar. I reached the black fence. I couldn't see over it. It was too high. But I knew where Gus's back porch was. I knew the distance. I stood up, clutching the package. I swung my arm, testing the weight. I prayed I wouldn't hit a window. I prayed Gus would hear it. I threw it. The package sailed over the black wood. I held my breath. A second later, I heard a soft thud on wood. It had landed on his deck. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Then I saw a flicker of light through the cracks in the fence boards. A flashlight beam sweeping across the deck. Then silence. 10 minutes later, a piece of paper fluttered over the fence and landed at my feet. It was weighted down with a small stone. I picked it up and shone my own small light on it. It was a page torn from a book. On it, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "They are watching." I looked up at the main house. A red light blinked in the darkness from the second-floor window. A camera with night vision. They had seen me, or at least they would see the footage in the morning. I scrambled back through the window and into my bed, my heart racing like a drum. I felt like a criminal. But as I lay there clutching that scrap of paper, I realized something. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a soldier. Preston and Tiffany thought they had successfully isolated us. They thought the wall and the locks and the restraining order would break the connection. But they forgot that shared suffering is a stronger bond than any legal contract. They had trapped 2 dangerous old men in a corner. And they were about to find out that we still had some fight left in us. But the next morning, the consequences arrived swift and brutal. And I realized that throwing a package over a fence wasn't enough. I needed a bigger weapon, and I needed to find it before Gus ran out of time. The snow began falling early on Christmas Eve, covering the black fence in a layer of pristine white powder that almost made it look innocent. Inside the main house, the heating system was humming at 72 degrees. The air smelled of balsam fir candles and roasted turkey with chestnut stuffing. It was the kind of atmosphere that belonged on a greeting card. But the warmth didn't reach me. I sat in the corner of the living room, nursing a glass of water, watching my daughter-in-law orchestrate her holiday special. Tiffany had transformed the living room into a studio. She had set up professional lighting rigs around the 12-foot Christmas tree. There were piles of perfectly wrapped gifts that I knew were mostly empty boxes used for staging. A dozen of her influencer friends were there wearing matching red silk pajamas, drinking vintage champagne and laughing on cue every time Tiffany pointed her phone at them. "Guys, we are so blessed this year," Tiffany chirped to her camera. "We have safety. We have abundance. And we have each other. Merry Christmas from the Bennett household." My son Preston was by the fireplace refilling glasses. He was already drunk. His face was flushed and his tie was loose. He was laughing too loud, slapping his friends on the back, playing the part of the successful host. But I saw the way his eyes kept darting to the window. He was waiting for something. At 4 p.m, a white truck with the city municipal logo pulled up to the curb next door. 2 men in heavy yellow parkas got out carrying clipboards and tools. They walked up to the utility meter on the side of Gus's house. I watched through the sheer curtains as one of them used a specialized tool to yank the meter from its socket. The lights in Gus's house flickered once and died. The faint glow of his television vanished. The house went dark. I stood up and walked over to Preston. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. "Why is the power company pulling Gus's meter on Christmas Eve?" Preston took a long swallow of his drink. He smirked, a nasty expression that distorted his handsome face. "Just doing my civic duty, Dad. I made an anonymous call to the City Code Enforcement Office this morning. I reported a severe electrical hazard, exposed wiring, sparking outlets, a potential fire risk to the whole neighborhood." He chuckled, swirling the ice in his glass. "They have to investigate immediately when it is a fire hazard. It is protocol. They pull the meter until a licensed electrician can inspect and certify the system. And since it is a holiday weekend and Gus is broke, no electrician is coming until at least Tuesday." "You cut his heat," I said, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Preston, it is 10 degrees outside. The low tonight is 5 below zero. He is an old man on blood thinners. He will freeze to death." Preston shrugged. He should have thought about that before he lowered our property value. Maybe the cold will make him realize he needs to move to a facility. We are just helping him make the right decision. I looked at my son and I saw a stranger. A cruel, heartless stranger who was willing to kill a man for a real estate deal. I turned away from him and walked to the kitchen. The catering staff was busy plating appetizers. I grabbed a large thermal flask from the cabinet. I filled it with the hot butternut squash soup that was simmering on the stove. I went to the mudroom and pulled my heavy down parka off the hook. I grabbed the thickest wool blanket from the linen closet. I was going to Gus. I didn't care about the restraining order. I didn't care about the fence. I wasn't going to let him die in the dark. I marched toward the back door. My hand was on the knob when a hand slammed against the wood above my head, holding the door shut. I turned around. Tiffany was standing there. She wasn't smiling for the camera anymore. Her eyes were hard like flint. Behind her, the party was in full swing, the music loud, the laughter shrill. "Where do you think you are going, Harrison?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. "I am taking this soup to the neighbor," I said. "Because you and your husband just tried to murder him by cutting his heat." "Move, Tiffany." She didn't move. She leaned in closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. "If you open that door, Harrison, if you step 1 foot out into that snow to help that man, you are done." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means you are making a choice, right now, tonight. You either stay here and celebrate Christmas with your family, with the people who put a roof over your head, or you go out there to that stranger. But if you walk out that door, do not expect to come back to this table. Do not expect a plate of turkey. Do not expect to see us tomorrow." You will be dead to us. Preston had wandered into the kitchen, attracted by the raised voices. He stood behind his wife, swaying slightly. She is right, Dad, he slurred. You have to pick a side. You are either with us or against us. Loyalty is everything. I looked at the scene before me, the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of the food, the expensive decorations. It was everything I had worked my whole life to provide for them. I built this life. I paid for this house, and now they were holding it hostage. I looked at Preston, my son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I sat up with when he had a fever. He was looking at me with contempt. He was waiting for me to fold. He expected me to be the weak old man who was afraid of being alone. I gripped the handle of the thermos tight. I felt the heat of the soup radiating through the metal. It was the only real warmth in the room. I looked Preston in the eye. You talk about family, Preston. You talk about loyalty. But you don't know the meaning of those words. I adjusted the blanket under my arm. You want me to choose between my family and a stranger. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. The music from the other room seemed to fade away. My family died 2 years ago, Preston. My family died the day I buried your mother, because the woman who raised you would never let a man freeze to death on Christmas, and the boy she raised would never have turned off the power. Preston flinched as if I had slapped him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned to Tiffany. Get out of my way. I didn't wait for her to move. I shoved the door open, forcing her to step back or be hit by the wood. A gust of freezing wind and snow blew into the kitchen, swirling around their expensive clothes. I stepped out into the storm. The cold hit me like a hammer. The wind howled, tearing at my coat. I heard the door slam shut behind me and the lock turn with a decisive click. I was locked out. I was alone in the blizzard. I didn't look back. I trudged through the deep snow toward the guest house first to grab my keys and a flashlight, then toward the black fence. The snow was drifting high against the wood. I couldn't throw the soup over. I had to go around. I walked down the long driveway, fighting the wind. I walked out onto the street. The road was deserted. The snowplows hadn't come through yet. The windows of the other houses in the neighborhood glowed with warm yellow light. I could see families gathering Christmas trees, sparkling. Gus's house was a black void at the end of the block. It looked abandoned. It looked like a tomb. I struggled up his walkway. My hip was screaming in protest. My fingers were numb inside my gloves. I pounded on his front door. Gus. It is Harrison. Open up. There was no answer. I tried the knob. It was locked. I went around to the back. The snow was deeper here, up to my knees. I fell once, dropping the blanket, but I managed to keep the soup upright. I scrambled up onto his back porch. Gus, please. I shone my flashlight through the kitchen window. The beam cut through the darkness, and then I saw him. Gus was in the living room. He wasn't in his wheelchair. He was on the floor. He had pulled the cushions off the sofa and made a sort of nest near the cold fireplace. He was curled up in a tight ball wrapped in a thin afghan. He wasn't moving. Panic seized me. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I used the handle of my heavy cane and smashed the glass of the back door window. The sound was swallowed by the howling wind. I reached in, unlocked the deadbolt, and pushed the door open. The air inside the house was freezing. It was colder than outside because the dampness had settled in. I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. I rushed over to him. I dropped to my knees beside the pile of cushions. Gus. Gus, can you hear me? I touched his face. His skin was like ice, but then his eyelids fluttered. He let out a low moan. Harry, he whispered. His teeth were chattering so hard the words were barely intelligible. Is that you? It is me, Gus. I am here. I quickly unrolled the heavy wool blanket I had brought. I wrapped it around him, tucking it tight. I opened the thermos. Steam poured out, smelling of sage and squash. "Drink this," I said, holding the cup to his blue lips. "You have to drink." He took a small sip, then coughed, but he swallowed. I got a few more sips into him. "They cut the line, Harry," he chattered. "They cut the line." "I know," I said, feeling a tear freeze on my cheek. "I know they did. But I am here now." I looked around the dark, freezing room. We couldn't stay here. The temperature was dropping fast. But I couldn't take him to my guest house. Preston would see us. He would call the police for violating the restraining order. He would have Gus arrested and thrown in a cell on Christmas Eve. I saw Gus's hand clutching something tight against his chest. It wasn't a blanket. It was a small leather-bound book. He was holding onto it like a lifeline. "We have to get you warm, Gus," I said. He shook his head weakly. "No hospital, Harry. No doctors. If I go, they win. If I leave the house, they will bulldoze it. I know their plan." He gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Stay with me, Harry. Just stay." I looked at the window where the snow was pouring in through the broken glass. I looked at the old man shivering on the floor. I wasn't going anywhere. I pulled the cushions closer, building a barrier against the drafts. I sat down next to him and wrapped my own coat around both of us. We sat there in the dark, two old men huddled against the cold, while the rest of the world celebrated. That was the longest night of my life. I listened to the wind. I listened to Gus's shallow breathing, and I thought about the family I had left behind in the warm house next door. They were dead to me now. Truly dead. But as the first gray light of Christmas morning filtered through the broken window, I realized something else. The cold hadn't killed us. We were still here, and Gus was still holding on to that leather book. "Harry," he whispered as the sun came up. I looked down. He was pale, deathly pale, but his eyes were clear. "You are a good man, Harry. You came." He tried to sit up but failed. He pressed the leather book into my hand. "Take this," he said. "Keep it safe. Don't look at it yet. Only when I am gone." "Gus, don't talk like that." He smiled, a faint ghost of a smile. "It is okay. I am ready. But they aren't." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that terrified me. "The game is over, Harry. But the checkmate is yours." Those were the last clear words he spoke. By noon, his fever had spiked. By evening, he was delirious. And 3 days later, despite my efforts, despite the ambulance I finally called when he lost consciousness, Augustus Wainwright was gone. My son thought he had won. He thought the problem was buried. But he didn't know about the leather book. And he didn't know that the man we buried in the rain wasn't just a retired actuary. He was something much, much more dangerous. And he had left his weapon to me. The morning sun that filtered through the broken glass of the back door brought no warmth, only a harsh gray light that illuminated the severity of the situation. Gus was burning up. I could feel the heat radiating from him through the layers of wool blankets I had wrapped him in. His breathing had changed from a shallow rhythm to a wet, rasping sound that rattled deep in his chest. I knew immediately it was pneumonia. The cold night in a house without power had done exactly what my son intended it to do. It had broken the final line of defense in a frail body. I reached for my phone to call an ambulance, but Gus's hand shot out from beneath the blankets and gripped my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by a desperate final burst of adrenaline. He shook his head, his eyes wide and feverish behind his thick glasses. He pulled me closer until his face was inches from mine. He reached into the pocket of his pajama shirt and pulled out a small silver key. It wasn't a house key. It looked like something for a safety deposit box or a specialized cabinet. It was old, and the metal was worn smooth by years of worry. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it. "Keep this, Harry," he wheezed. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "Do not lose it. When I am gone, you take this to Sterling Thorne." I didn't know who Sterling Thorne was. The name sounded impressive, like someone from a different world than the one we lived in. But I didn't ask questions. I saw the urgency in Gus's eyes. This was his last will, his final command. I nodded and slipped the key into my pocket, feeling its cold metal bite against my leg. I promised him I would do it. But I also told him I was calling the paramedics. This time, he didn't fight me. His strength evaporated as quickly as it had come, and he slumped back against the sofa cushions I had piled on the floor. He closed his eyes and whispered something I could barely hear. He said, "It is done." The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. The sirens cut through the quiet Christmas morning air. I watched as they loaded him onto the stretcher. He looked so small, so insignificant under the straps. I rode with him to the hospital, ignoring the texts that started blowing up my phone from Preston, asking where I was and why the police were back. I didn't care. My place was beside the man my family had tried to destroy. For 3 days, I sat in a plastic chair next to his hospital bed. The doctors confirmed it was severe pneumonia complicated by hypothermia and underlying heart issues. They did what they could, but Gus didn't seem to want to fight. He seemed like a man who had completed his mission and was ready to rest. He slept most of the time. Occasionally he would wake up, look at me to make sure I was still there, and then drift back off. He didn't speak again about the key or the leather book. He just held my hand. On the third day at 4 in the afternoon, the heart monitor flatlined. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a long, high-pitched tone that signaled the end of Augustus Wainwright. I stood up and smoothed the hair back from his forehead. I said a silent prayer, not for his soul, because I knew it was pure, but for justice. I walked out of the hospital into the biting cold of the parking lot, feeling a hollowness in my chest that echoed the emptiness of his house. I took a cab back to the neighborhood. I dreaded going back. I dreaded seeing the black fence, but I had to go back. I had things to do. As the cab turned onto our street, I saw smoke rising into the winter sky. For a second, panic seized me. I thought they had actually done it. I thought they had set fire to Gus's house to finish the job. But as we got closer, I realized the smoke wasn't coming from the house next door. It was coming from my backyard. I paid the driver and walked up the driveway. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of charcoal and expensive steak. I walked around the side of the house and stopped. Despite the freezing temperature, Preston had dragged the massive stainless steel grill out onto the patio. He was wearing a heavy designer coat and grilling ribeye steaks. Tiffany was sitting on one of the new patio chairs wrapped in a fur blanket, holding a glass of red wine. Music was playing from a portable speaker. They were having a barbecue in the middle of winter, in the middle of a tragedy. They didn't see me at first. They were too busy toasting. To the future. Tiffany said, raising her glass toward the black fence. To clean views and high property values. Preston laughed as he flipped a steak. Ding dong, the witch is dead. He sang off key. Or in this case, the old wizard. I talked to the nurse Dad hired. She said he checked out an hour ago. Finally. I stood there feeling a wave of nausea so strong I almost vomited. They knew he was dead, and they were celebrating. They were grilling meat a few yards away from where a man had lived for 40 years, and they were treating his death like a winning lottery ticket. Tiffany spotted me then. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look sad. She smiled a bright, predatory smile. Harrison, you are back. We heard the good news. Preston put a steak on for you. We are celebrating. Celebrating, I repeated. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Of course, she said, taking a sip of wine. The thorn in our side is gone. The obstacle is removed. Do you know what this does for the appraisal value, Harrison? With him gone and that eyesore of a house likely going into foreclosure or probate, we can finally move forward with the development deal. The value of this land just doubled. She looked at the fence with satisfaction. We can tear that fence down soon. Once we buy the lot next door, we will have the biggest estate on the block. It is a good day, Harrison. You should be happy. We did this for you. Preston walked over holding a plate with a steaming steak. Here, Dad. Medium rare, just how you like it. Eat up. You look like you have been haunting a graveyard for 3 days. I looked at the meat. It was red and juicy, and all I could think of was the poisoned meat they had accused Gus of throwing. All I could think of was the soup I had tried to feed him while he froze to death because of their phone call. I looked at my son. His face was flushed with the heat of the grill and the excitement of greed. He honestly thought I would join in. He thought that because the deed was done, I would just accept the profit and move on. He thought I was like him. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the plate. I didn't lecture them about morality. I realized in that moment that words were useless. You cannot explain light to people who have chosen to live in darkness. You cannot explain humanity to people who have traded their souls for square footage. I looked at Preston, and I pushed the plate away gently. I am not hungry, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a stranger. Preston frowned. Suit yourself. More for me. I walked past them. I walked past the celebration of death. I went into the guest house and locked the door. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of my bed and took the small silver key out of my pocket. I held it tight until it warmed up in my hand. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours making phone calls. I called the funeral home. I called the cemetery where Sarah was buried. I arranged everything. I used the last of my savings, the money I had set aside for emergencies. This was an emergency. A man's dignity was at stake. I didn't tell Preston or Tiffany. I didn't put an obituary in the paper. I didn't want them showing up to pretend they cared. I didn't want their crocodile tears or their whispered conversations about real estate deals over an open grave. The funeral was scheduled for 2 days later. I stood at my window and watched them over the next 48 hours. They were giddy. A real estate agent came by. A developer came by. They walked the property line, pointing and gesturing. They were already spending the money they thought they would make. They were already erasing Gus from the map. They didn't pay any attention to me. To them, I was just the old man in the guest house, the silent roommate who had finally learned his place. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was broken. But as I put on my best black suit that morning, as I polished my shoes and placed the silver key securely in my vest pocket, I knew something they didn't. I knew about the leather book. I knew about the lawyer named Sterling Thorne. And I knew that while they were planning to build a condo complex on Gus's grave, Gus had already built a trapdoor beneath their feet. I walked out to my truck. It was raining, a cold, gray drizzle that matched the sky. I drove to the funeral home alone. I was the only mourner. I was the only witness. But as I walked into the chapel, I saw a man sitting in the front row. He wasn't family. He wasn't a neighbor. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He stood up when I entered. He looked at me with eyes that were sharp and intelligent. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "we have been waiting for you." And that was when the real story began. The rain at the cemetery was relentless. It wasn't a dramatic storm, just a cold, steady drizzle that soaked into the ground and turned the earth into gray mud. I stood by the open grave watching the simple pine casket I had purchased with my emergency fund being lowered into the ground. There were no flowers except for a single white rose I had cut from Gus's garden before I left. It was one of the few that had survived the neglect of the last few weeks. The pastor was a young man I didn't know. He rushed through the service, checking his watch every few minutes. He was preaching to an empty room. There were no grieving relatives, no neighbors, no friends from the old days. Just me, an old structural engineer leaning on a cane, and the stranger sitting in the front row. I kept glancing at the stranger. He was a stark contrast to the dreary setting. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored to perfection, the kind of fabric that didn't seem to wrinkle. He held a black umbrella with a polished silver handle. He didn't look sad. He looked focused. He watched the casket with an intensity that made me uneasy. I wondered if he was a debt collector finally coming to claim whatever Gus had left. Or maybe he was a representative from the city checking to make sure the property was truly vacant so they could condemn it. When the service ended, the pastor mumbled a quick amenity and practically ran for his car. I stepped forward and dropped the white rose onto the wood. "Goodbye, Gus," I whispered. "You deserved better than this." I turned to leave my boots squelching in the mud. I was dreading the drive back. I was dreading the sight of my son and daughter-in-law celebrating in the house that used to be mine. "Mr. Bennett." The voice was deep and resonant. I stopped and turned. The stranger was standing a few feet away. He was taller than he looked sitting down. He held the umbrella out, offering me shelter from the rain. "I am Sterling Thorne," he said, extending a gloved hand. "I believe Augustus gave you something for me." My hand instinctively went to my vest pocket, where the small silver key was warm against my chest. Gus had told me to find Sterling Thorne. I hadn't expected him to find me. I gripped my cane tighter. "He did," I said. "But I don't know who you are, Mr. Thorne. And I don't hand over keys to strangers in graveyards." A faint smile touched his lips. It wasn't a mocking smile like Preston's. It was respectful. "Fair enough," he said. "This is not the place for business. My car is right over there. It is warm and dry. Please allow me to drive you back. We have a lot to discuss." I looked toward the parking lot. A long black limousine was idling near the gate. It looked like a spaceship compared to my rusted Ford truck. I hesitated. I was tired. My hip was throbbing, and I wanted answers. I nodded. "All right, but my truck is here. My driver will bring it to your residence," Sterling said as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We walked to the limousine. The driver held the door open. The interior smelled of expensive leather and old money. I sank into the seat, and the warmth of the climate control wrapped around me. Sterling sat opposite me. He opened a small refrigerator and offered me a bottle of water. I took it, my hands shaking slightly. Sterling opened a leather briefcase on his lap. He didn't pull out a bill or a lawsuit. He pulled out a photograph. He slid it across the small table between us. It was an old black and white photo from the late 70s. It showed two men standing in front of a massive server room filled with blinking lights and reel-to-reel computers. One of the men was clearly a younger Sterling Thorne, sharp and ambitious. The other man was laughing, holding a champagne bottle. He had thick glasses and a messy beard, but the smile was unmistakable. It was Gus. I looked up at Sterling, confused. "I don't understand," I said. Gus was an actuary. He lived on a fixed income. He couldn't afford to fix his gutters. Sterling shook his head slowly. "Augustus Wainwright was many things, Mr. Bennett, but he was never an actuary. And he certainly wasn't poor." Sterling tapped the photo. "That man was the founder and chief architect of Titan Security Systems. Does the name ring a bell?" I felt a jolt of recognition. Titan Security. Back in the 90s, they were the gold standard. They built the encryption software for banks, for government agencies. They were everywhere. He founded Titan. I asked, incredulous. He wrote the code, Sterling corrected. I handled the business, he handled the genius. In 1998, we sold the company to a defense contractor. It was the largest tech acquisition of the decade. I sat back against the leather seat, stunned. So he had money. Sterling looked out the window at the rain-streaked gravestones. When he died 3 days ago, Augustus Wainwright's net worth was approximately $42 million. The number hung in the air. 42 million. I thought about the $50,000 lawsuit my son had filed against him. I thought about Preston calling him a broke loser. I thought about the soup I had carried through the snow because I thought he couldn't afford food. 42 million, I repeated. And he lived in that house. He let the paint peel. He let them cut his power. Why? Because he hated this. Sterling gestured around the luxurious car. He hated the pretension. He hated the fake friends who only called when they wanted a loan. He hated the way money changed people. After the sale, he walked away. He wanted a simple life. He wanted to tend his roses, read his books, and live in a neighborhood where people waved hello because they were neighbors, not because they wanted a piece of his portfolio. Sterling looked at me, his eyes hard. He found that peace for a long time, until your son and his wife moved in. I felt a flush of shame burn my neck. I didn't know, I whispered. I swear I didn't know. I know you didn't, Sterling said softly. But Gus knew. He knew everything. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Your daughter-in-law called him deaf. She called him senile. She mocked him on the internet for being a confused old man. But Gus wasn't deaf, Harrison. He wore high-fidelity hearing aids, the kind musicians use. He usually turned them down to tune out the noise of the world. But when the fence went up, when the insults started, he turned them up. My blood ran cold. He heard them. He heard everything. Sterling confirmed. He heard them plotting in the backyard. He heard them laughing about the lawsuit. He heard Preston bragging about the gambling debts. He heard Tiffany planning to bulldoze his garden. Sterling paused, letting the weight of that sink in. And he saw them too. You mentioned the binoculars, the soil moisture meter. That was just a distraction. Gus was a security expert, Harrison. He was the grandfather of modern surveillance. Did you really think he would live in a house without protecting himself? He tapped the briefcase again. His house wasn't falling apart because he was negligent. It was camouflage. Inside that house, behind the peeling wallpaper and the dusty curtains, is a surveillance system that rivals the CIA. High-definition cameras, long-range microphones, thermal imaging. He recorded every piece of trash thrown into his yard. He recorded the police intimidation. He recorded the moment your son pushed you down in the grass. I remembered the leather book Gus had given me. I remembered the key in my pocket. The book, I said. He gave me a book. And a key. Sterling nodded. The key is for the server room in his basement. The book is the index. It is the log of every interaction he had with your family for the last 2 years. I felt sick. Gus had sat there in his wheelchair playing the victim while he compiled a mountain of evidence. He had watched them destroy him, and he had documented every blow. Why didn't he stop them? I asked. He could have hired a team of lawyers. He could have bought their house and evicted them. He had $42 million. Why did he let them kill him? Sterling's expression softened. He looked at me with something like admiration. Because he was waiting for you, Harrison. For me. He told me about you, Sterling said. He told me that for years you were just the guy next door. You waved. You were polite. But you were passive. You let your son take over. You let them push you into the guest house. Gus was disappointed. He thought you had given up. Sterling smiled a small, sad smile. But then the fence went up, and you came to his back door with a jar of apple butter. You stood in front of the police. You walked out into a blizzard to bring him soup. You proved that there was still decency in that house. Sterling closed his briefcase. The click of the latch sounded loud in the quiet car. Gus didn't fight back because he knew his body was failing. He knew he didn't have much time left. He didn't want to spend his last days in court. He wanted to leave a legacy, not of money, but of justice. The car began to move, gliding smoothly out of the cemetery. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To the house," Sterling said. "Your son thinks the property is abandoned. He thinks he has won. But we need to go into that basement, Harrison. We need to unlock the server room." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a cold intensity. "Gus left everything to you. The money, the evidence, the power. But he left it with a condition." "What condition?" "That you use it," Sterling said. "That you finish what he started. That you expose the truth." I put my hand over my vest pocket, feeling the outline of the silver key. I thought about Preston and Tiffany grilling steaks while Gus lay dying. I thought about the fake tears on Tiffany's live stream. I thought about the way they treated me like a piece of furniture they could move around or discard. I looked at Sterling. "Take me there," I said. The limo turned onto the main road, heading back toward the neighborhood where a black fence stood as a monument to greed. But the man returning wasn't the tired old engineer who had left that morning. I was coming back with $42 million worth of ammunition, and I was ready to pull the trigger. The limousine glided to a stop in front of Gus's house. The street was quiet. It was the middle of the week and most of the neighbors were at work. I looked across the lawn at the main house. It stood dark and silent. The driveway was empty. Preston and Tiffany were not home. They had flown to a 5-star resort in Cabo San Lucas the morning after Gus died. They paid for the first-class tickets with a new credit card Preston had opened in my name a week ago. They were celebrating their victory with margaritas on a beach, believing that the old man next door was rotting in the ground, and his secrets were buried with him. They were wrong. Sterling Thorne opened the car door, and we stepped out into the cold winter air. He didn't walk to the front door. He walked around to the side entrance, the one I had broken into on Christmas Eve. A crew had already boarded up the window I smashed, but Sterling had a key for the deadbolt. He unlocked it, and we stepped into the kitchen. It was exactly as I remembered it, freezing cold. The air smelled of stale tea and old paper. The cushions were still piled on the floor where I had tried to keep Gus warm. Seeing them sent a sharp pang of grief through my chest, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for grief. It was the time for answers. Sterling led me to the hallway. He stopped in front of a linen closet. It looked ordinary. The door was painted a peeling cream color. He opened it, revealing stacks of old towels and moth-eaten blankets. He reached inside and pushed aside a stack of sheets on the middle shelf. Behind them was a small metal panel. He pressed his thumb against it. A biometric scanner beeped green. The back wall of the closet clicked and swung inward. It was a hidden door seamlessly integrated into the frame. "After you, Mr. Bennett," Sterling said. I stepped through the opening. I expected a dusty storage room. What I found was a staircase leading down, bathed in cool blue LED light. The air here was different. It was climate-controlled, filtered, and dry. The hum of heavy machinery vibrated through the metal steps. We descended into the basement. But it wasn't the damp, dark basement of an old house. It was a fortress. The walls were soundproofed. In the center of the room sat a horseshoe-shaped desk surrounded by banks of servers that hummed with quiet power. And on the wall were 12 high-definition monitors. "This is the nerve center," Sterling said, his voice echoing slightly in the acoustic space. Gus built this 3 years ago when your son moved in. He knew what kind of people they were from the first day. I walked up to the monitors. My breath caught in my throat. The image quality was terrifying. It was 4K resolution, crystal clear. Gus wasn't using binoculars. He had installed military-grade long-range cameras in the eaves of his roof and in the birdhouses in his trees. They were pointed directly at my property. I could see everything. One screen showed the entire backyard. I could see the individual blades of grass where I had fallen when Preston pushed me. Another screen showed the patio. But the most shocking feeds were the ones pointed at the house itself. The cameras had such high-resolution zoom and low-light capability that they could see through the windows of the main house as if the glass didn't exist. I could see into the kitchen. I could see into the living room. I could see into Preston's office. He is dangerous, Tiffany had said. She was right. But he wasn't dangerous because he was a predator. He was dangerous because he was a witness. He was the all-seeing eye that they never knew existed. Sterling walked over to the main console. The silver key, Harrison. I took the key from my pocket. My hand was steady now. I handed it to him. Sterling inserted it into a slot on the main drive. He typed a command on the keyboard. Gus indexed everything. Sterling said. He categorized the footage by event. He wanted you to see 3 specific files first. He clicked a folder labeled The Dog. On the main screen, a video began to play. The timestamp was from the day Princess got sick. The camera angle was high, looking down into my backyard. I saw Tiffany walk out onto the patio. She was holding a bowl. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bottle. She poured a dark liquid over the dog food. She put the bowl down. Princess ran over and ate it greedily. Tiffany watched, her arms crossed. She waited until the dog finished. Then she picked up a piece of raw meat from a plate on the table and tossed it near the black fence. She staged the scene perfectly. 10 minutes later, when the dog started vomiting, Tiffany began to scream. I watched the video in silence. It wasn't Gus. It wasn't an accident. She had poisoned her own dog. She had made an innocent animal suffer just to frame an old man and create content for her social media. The cruelty was so casual, so calculated, it made my blood run cold. Sterling clicked the next file. The forgery. The screen changed. This view was through the window of Preston's home office. The audio was crystal clear, picked up by a laser microphone directed at the glass. Preston was sitting at his desk. He had a light box tracing a document. I heard his voice. It is easy, Tiff. He shakes so much these days his signature is basically a scribble, anyway. I just have to trace the deed transfer and have the notary stamp it. I already paid the guy off. Tiffany walked into the frame. Are you sure he won't get a notification from the bank? Preston laughed. I changed the email address on his account last week. All the alerts go to a dummy account I control. He thinks he still owns the land. By the time he figures it out, the developers will have already broken ground. We will sell the combined lot, get the $3 million, and put him in a state facility. He won't even know what hit him. I stared at my son's face on the screen. He was talking about selling my home, the home I worked 40 years to pay for, as if he were trading a used car. He was talking about institutionalizing me to cover his theft. Sterling didn't say a word. He let the evidence speak for itself. He clicked the third file. The burden. This video was from Christmas Eve. It was just after I had walked out into the snow. Preston and Tiffany were in the kitchen. The party was still going on in the other room. Preston was pouring another drink. Do you think he will actually go over there? He asked. Tiffany shrugged, picking at a tray of appetizers. Let him. If he freezes, it solves our problem sooner. We don't have to wait for the nursing home. Preston swirled his drink. He is such a burden. Just a useless old man eating up our resources. Did you see him trying to be the hero with that soup? It was pathetic. He is a leech tiff, a dying leech attached to our bank account. Tiffany laughed. Well, nature has a way of pruning dead branches. Let the cold do the work. The video ended. The screen went black. I stood there in the blue light of the server room. I expected to cry. I expected to feel that crushing weight of heartbreak that comes when you realize your children do not love you. But the tears didn't come. The heartbreak didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sensation. It was like a steel beam snapping into place. It was the feeling of structural integrity returning. The confusion was gone. The doubt was gone. The hope that maybe I had misunderstood them was gone. I looked at Sterling. How much data is here? I asked. 2 terabytes. Sterling replied. Every conversation, every plan, every fraud. It goes back 2 years. I looked at the console. There was a port for an external drive. I want a copy, I said. I want everything. Sterling nodded. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a heavy encrypted hard drive. He plugged it in. I anticipated that. The transfer will take about 20 minutes. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 20 minutes to download the truth. 20 minutes to arm myself. I thought about Preston and Tiffany in Mexico drinking their margaritas. They thought they were the main characters in this story. They thought they were the predators and I was the prey. They thought Gus was just a victim. They didn't know that Gus had given me the weapon. And they didn't know that the man holding it wasn't the father who loved them anymore. That man had died in the snow on Christmas Eve. The man standing in the server room was Harrison Bennett. And I was about to become the most dangerous thing they had ever encountered. The download finished with a soft chime. I pulled the drive out and put it in my pocket right next to the silver key. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. I turned to Sterling. Now show me the will, I said. Sterling smiled. Right this way, Mr. Bennett. The best part is yet to come. The limousine ride from the funeral home was silent, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the space between us. I stared out at the passing city, the rain streaking the windows like tears, but my own eyes were dry. I had spent all my tears on Gus in that freezing house. Now there was only a cold, hard resolve. We arrived at a sleek glass building downtown. Sterling Thorne bypassed the reception and led me straight to a corner office that smelled of mahogany and expensive leather. He gestured for me to sit in a plush chair opposite his massive desk. I know you have questions, Mr. Bennett. Sterling began opening a thick leather portfolio. And I have answers. But first we need to address the legalities. He pulled out a document, the paper crisp and cream-colored. This is the last will and testament of Augustus Wainwright, he said formally. As I mentioned, the bulk of his liquid assets, approximately $40 million, has been designated for the veterans of foreign wars and the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Gus was very specific about that. He wanted to leave a legacy of care, not consumption. I nodded. It made sense. Gus was a man who lived simply. He wouldn't want his money fueling the kind of greed he saw next door. However, Sterling continued, his eyes locking onto mine, he created a specific entity for you, a limited liability company named Justice Holdings. A company? I asked, confused. I'm a retired engineer, Mr. Thorne. I don't know anything about running a business. You won't have to run it, Sterling said, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. This company isn't an operating business. It's a holding company, and it holds exactly one asset. He slid a blue-bound document across the desk toward me. It looked official, stamped with the seal of a bank I recognized. Open it, he urged. I flipped the cover. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, the borrower's name, the property address. My breath caught in my throat. Borrower Preston Bennett. Property address 42 Oakwood Drive. Lender Justice Holdings, LLC. I don't understand, I stammered. This is Preston's mortgage note. Correct, Sterling said, leaning back in his chair. 6 months ago, your son stopped paying his mortgage. The gambling debts, the lifestyle, the bad investments, it all caught up with him. He was in pre-foreclosure. The bank was weeks away from putting the house up for auction. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. My son, the successful real estate agent, was a fraud. He had been living in a house he couldn't afford, pretending to be a king, while the castle was crumbling around him. Gus monitored the public records, Sterling explained. When he saw the notice of default filed against the property, he acted. He used a shell company to approach the bank. Banks hate bad debt, Harrison. They want it off their books. Gus bought the non-performing note for cash at a significant discount. He paused, letting the reality sink in. Gus became the bank Harrison. For the last 6 months, your son hasn't owed money to Chase or Wells Fargo. He has owed it to Gus, or rather to Justice Holdings. And he hasn't paid, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Not a dime, Sterling confirmed. He is currently 5 months delinquent. He has ignored every demand letter, every notice. He probably thinks it's just bureaucratic incompetence buying him time until he can sell the land to that developer. Sterling leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave heavy with implication. Under Pennsylvania law, once a borrower is more than 120 days delinquent, the lien holder has the right to accelerate the loan and initiate foreclosure proceedings immediately. He pointed a manicured finger at me. You own Justice Holdings, Harrison. You are the sole member and manager. That means you are the lender. You own the debt. And you have the legal right to foreclose on your own son. Today. The room went silent. I stared at the document in my hands. It wasn't just paper. It was a sword. Gus hadn't just given me evidence of their cruelty. He had given me the legal authority to evict them from the life they had stolen. Technically, Sterling said, watching my face closely, you are their landlord, and a very powerful one at that. You can seize the property to satisfy the debt. You can sell it. You can kick them out. I thought about the conversation I had heard in the server room. Preston laughing about selling the house, about putting me in a facility. He was planning to sell a house he didn't even own anymore. He was counting chickens that had already been slaughtered. How fast can we do this? I asked, my voice steady. Sterling's smile widened. It was a shark's smile, sharp and satisfied. The paperwork is already drafted. Gus had me prepare it the week before he died. He knew the timing would be critical. All we need is your signature authorizing the foreclosure action. We can post the notice on the door tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, I repeated. Tomorrow, Preston and Tiffany would be back from Mexico. They would be tan, rested, and arrogant, expecting to bulldoze Gus's house and celebrate their victory. Instead, they were going to come home to a lock they couldn't open. I picked up the heavy fountain pen Sterling offered. I looked at the signature line, Member Manager Harrison Bennett. I thought about the clueless old man comment. I thought about the poison meat. I thought about Gus freezing in the dark. I signed my name. The ink flowed black and permanent. Done, Sterling said, closing the folder with a snap. Justice Holdings has officially called the loan. The total amount due, including penalties and back interest, is $1.2 million. If they cannot pay that in full within 24 hours, which we know they can't, the property reverts to you. He stood up and extended his hand. Congratulations, Mr. Bennett. You just bought your house back. I shook his hand. It felt solid, real. Thank you, Sterling, for everything. Don't thank me, he said. Thank Gus. He left a note for you with the file. Just one sentence. What did it say? He said, "Tell Harry that sometimes the only way to fix a broken foundation is to tear the house down." I walked out of the office and into the elevator. As the numbers counted down to the lobby, I felt a strange lightness. The grief was still there, but the helplessness was gone. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the owner. I took a cab back to the neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. The black fence still loomed in the backyard, a monument to their hate. But parked in front of Gus's house was a massive yellow bulldozer on a flatbed trailer. Preston must have scheduled it before he left, confident in his plan. I walked up to the driver, a burly man drinking coffee from a thermos. "You here to demo the house next door?" I asked. "Yeah," the driver said. "Work order from a Mr. Preston Bennett. Start clearing the lot first thing tomorrow." I nodded. "Change of plans," I said. "Who are you?" "I'm the owner," I said, my voice ringing with new authority. "And we aren't demolishing that house." I pointed to the main house, the mansion my son had turned into a fortress of lies. "We have a different job for you tomorrow." "What kind of job?" I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled since Christmas. "Eviction," I said. "We're cleaning out the trash." The morning sun glinted off the yellow metal of the bulldozer parked in the street. It was a massive machine, a beast of steel and hydraulic power, sitting idle in front of Gus's house. I stood next to the operator, a man named Mike, sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup and checking my watch. It was 10 in the morning. Their flight had landed an hour ago. They would be here any minute. I adjusted my tie. I was wearing a suit today, not the worn-out cardigan and slacks they were used to seeing me in. I was dressed like the owner of a multi-million-dollar holding company, because that is exactly what I was. A black Uber SUV turned the corner and rolled down the street. It slowed as it approached the house. I could see the faces pressed against the glass. Preston and Tiffany. They looked tan. They looked rested. They looked like two people who had just spent a week drinking tequila on a beach paid for with stolen money. The car stopped. The doors opened. Preston stepped out first, wearing a white linen shirt and sunglasses. Tiffany followed in a sundress and a wide-brimmed hat. They stared at the bulldozer. A wide grin spread across Preston's face. He pointed at the machine, then at Gus's house. "Look at that tiff," he shouted. The city didn't waste any time. "They are already here to demo the eyesore. We are going to have a clear lot by the weekend." Tiffany clapped her hands together, a little jump of excitement. "Finally," she squealed. "We can start planning the expansion. I want the pool house right where his garden used to be." They were so arrogant, so blind. They started walking up the driveway, pulling their Louis Vuitton luggage behind them. They were so focused on the bulldozer and their imaginary future that they didn't even notice me standing by the front gate of the main house. Not the guest house, the main house. I stepped forward. My cane clicked loudly on the pavement. "Welcome home," I said, my voice carrying across the lawn. They both froze. Preston took off his sunglasses. He looked confused. He looked at me, then at the guest house, then back at me, standing possessively in front of the main entrance. "Dad," he said, a frown creasing his tanned forehead. "What are you doing? Why are you dressed like that? And why are you talking to the demo crew?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch. I let them feel the shift in the atmosphere. "I am giving them instructions, Preston," I said calmly. Preston laughed nervously. "Instructions? Dad, you don't give instructions. You just live here. Go back to the cottage. We are tired. We need to unpack." He tried to brush past me, dragging his suitcase. He reached for the front door handle. It was locked. He tried his key. It didn't turn. "What the hell?" he muttered. He tried again, jiggling the handle violently. "Did you change the locks, Dad? Did you break the keyhole?" I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the thick envelope Sterling had prepared. It was heavy. It contained the foreclosure notice, the acceleration clause, and the eviction order. I didn't change the locks, Preston. The owner changed the locks. I threw the envelope. I didn't hand it to him. I threw it. It hit him square in the chest and fell to the ground at his feet. Preston looked at the envelope, then at me. His face was turning red. "What is this? What is wrong with you? Read it," I said. He bent down and picked it up. He tore it open. He pulled out the documents. I watched his eyes scan the top page. I saw the moment the words registered. Notice of default. Notice of foreclosure. Justice Holdings, LLC. His hands started to shake. The paper rattled. This says the house is being foreclosed on. But that is impossible. I have time. I was in pre-foreclosure, but the bank sold your debt, Preston. I interrupted. They sold it 6 months ago. To a private company. Justice Holdings. Preston looked up, his eyes wild with panic. Who is Justice Holdings? Who are they? I will call my lawyer. I will sue them. You can't sue them, Preston, because you are looking at them. I tapped my chest with my cane. I am Justice Holdings. Gus left it to me. I own your debt. I own your mortgage. And since you haven't paid a dime in 5 months, I am exercising my right to take the property back. Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The color drained from his face, leaving his tan looking sallow and sick. You own the house. I nodded. I do. And I have decided to evict the current tenants. Preston turned to the bulldozer driver. Hey, you are here to demo the house next door, right? Tell him. The driver shook his head slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. No, sir. Mr. Bennett here hired me. The work order is for 42 Oakwood Drive. He pointed a thick finger at the main house. He wants me to clear the landscaping and remove the debris. He said he is cleaning out the property. Preston whipped his head back to me. Dad, what the hell are you doing? You can't do this. This is my home. I took a step closer. The anger I had held back for months finally surged forward. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and hard like ice. No, Preston. It isn't your home. It never was. I paid for it. I maintained it. And you stole it. But that ends today. I pointed at the bulldozer. I am not demolishing Gus's house. That house has more honor in its foundation than you have in your entire body. I hired him to help me clean out the trash from my house. I looked him up and down with disgust. And the trash is you, both of you. Tiffany, who had been standing silent in shock, suddenly snapped. The reality of losing her mansion, her status, her stage hit her like a physical blow. She dropped her bag and lunged at me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. You old bastard, she screamed. You senile old freak! You can't kick us out! This is my house. I decorated it. I made it famous. You are nothing but a guest. She raised her hand to slap me. Her nails were long and sharp. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I simply raised my other hand, the one holding the iPad I had taken from the server room. I pressed play and turned the screen toward her. The video was bright and clear. It showed Tiffany standing on the patio. It showed the bottle. It showed her pouring the dark liquid onto the dog food. It showed her watching Princess eat the poison. Tiffany froze. Her hand hovered in the air. Her eyes went wide, fixed on the screen. The sound of her own voice on the video echoing in the driveway. That is fake, she stammered. That is a deep fake? It is 4K resolution, Tiffany. I said, my voice cutting through her panic. Recorded by Gus's security system. The same system you said didn't exist. I swiped the screen showing the metadata, the timestamp, the undeniable proof. I have sent a copy of this video to your email, and I have another copy ready to go. I looked at her with zero sympathy. I can send this to the police. Animal cruelty is a felony in Pennsylvania, Tiffany. You could go to jail. Or I can send it to the brands that sponsor you. The makeup companies, the fashion lines. How do you think they will react when they see their influencer poisoning a dog for likes? Your career will be over in 5 minutes. Tiffany lowered her hand. She started to tremble. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they weren't fake this time. They were tears of terror. Please, Harrison, she whispered. Don't. You will ruin me. You ruined yourself, I said. You did this. Not me. Not Gus. You. I turned back to Preston. He was staring at the foreclosure papers in his hand. Tears streaming down his face. He looked broken. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar, but the jar was worth $2 million. Dad, please. He sobbed, dropping to his knees on the driveway. The gravel crunched under his expensive pants. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the poison. It was her idea. She made me do it. He pointed a shaking finger at his wife. She spends all the money, Dad. She forced me to take out the loans. She forced me to gamble to try and catch up. It is her fault. Please don't take the house. I have nowhere to go. Tiffany gasped. She turned on him like a viper. You coward! She shrieked. You spineless loser! You told me you could handle it. You told me your dad was a pushover. You lost the money, Preston. You are the one who failed. You are the one who can't provide for his wife. I told you to pay the mortgage. She screamed, kicking his suitcase. I told you to pay it months ago, but no, you had to buy a new car. You had to go to Vegas. Preston stood up, his face wet with tears and snot. Because you demanded it, Tiffany. You said you would leave me if I didn't buy you things. You are a leech. I watched them. My son and his wife screaming at each other in the driveway, their perfect marriage dissolving the moment the money ran out. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was finished. Enough, I shouted. My voice boomed, silencing them both. I don't care whose fault it is. I don't care about your excuses. You are both guilty. You both tried to destroy an innocent man, and you both tried to bury your father while he was still alive. I checked my watch. It is 10:15. I am giving you 24 hours. I pointed to the street. You can take your clothes. You can take your personal items. But the furniture stays. The electronics stay. Anything bought with my money stays. If you are not out by 10:15 tomorrow morning, I will have the sheriff execute the eviction order, and I will press charges for the dog. But where will we go? Preston wailed. We have no money, Dad. The credit cards are maxed out. I looked at my son one last time. I looked for any spark of pity in my heart, but I found only the memory of Gus freezing on the floor. That sounds like a problem for adults, Preston. Figure it out. I turned my back on them. I walked up the steps to the main house. I took out the new key Sterling had given me. It slid into the lock smoothly. I turned it. The door opened. I stepped inside and closed the door firmly behind me, engaging the deadbolt. I stood in the foyer of my home. It was quiet. The air smelled of their expensive candles, but underneath I could smell the house I had built. Outside I could hear them screaming at each other. I could hear Tiffany sobbing. I could hear Preston begging. I walked to the living room window and looked out. The bulldozer was still there, parked like a sentinel. Gus's house stood quiet and safe next door. I had done it. I had saved the neighborhood. I had saved myself. And as I watched my son drag his suitcase down the driveway, defeated and broken, I realized that Gus was right. The checkmate was mine. But it didn't feel like a game. It felt like surgery. Painful, bloody, but absolutely necessary to save the patient. And the patient was my life. The sheriff deputy arrived at exactly 10:15 the next morning. It wasn't the same deputy who had dragged Gus out of his house weeks ago. It was a stern woman with no patience for drama. She stood by the open front door, her hand resting on her belt, watching as Preston and Tiffany dragged their suitcases down the steps. They looked like refugees from a failed luxury cruise. Their designer clothes were wrinkled. Their eyes were red and swollen. They were carrying only what they could fit in 4 bags. I stood on the porch, leaning on my cane, watching them leave. I didn't help them carry a single thing. Preston stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at the house, then at me. He looked small. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrified realization of what lay ahead. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't have enough for a hotel. Can you just lend me $500? Just for a couple of nights until I figure this out." I looked at him. I remembered the gambling debts. I remembered the way he looked when he pushed me down in the grass. "I don't lend money, Preston," I said. "And I don't support able-bodied men who refuse to work. There is a labor shortage in this country. I am sure you can find a job by this afternoon if you lower your standards." He stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Then he turned and walked to his car. They loaded their bags in silence. As they drove away, they didn't look back. They didn't wave. They just disappeared around the corner, leaving me alone in the quiet aftermath of the war. But the punishment wasn't over. It was just beginning. Later that afternoon, I sat in Gus's server room. The blue light of the monitors washed over my face. I opened the file labeled "The Dog." I looked at the share button. I had promised Tiffany I would ruin her. And Harrison Bennett keeps his promises. I didn't post it to my own account. I created an anonymous profile. I uploaded the video of her poisoning Princess. I tagged every brand she worked with. I tagged the local animal shelters. I tagged the Homeowners Association page. And I tagged her own dedicated fan page using the hashtags she had created to build her empire. Then I hit send. The reaction was nuclear. Within 2 hours, the video had 10,000 views. Within 4 hours, it was trending locally. By evening, it was national news. The internet is a cruel place, but it has a special kind of hatred for people who hurt animals for clout. I watched her follower count drop in real time. It was like watching a building collapse. 50,000, 40,000, 10,000, 0. Her account was suspended for violating community guidelines on violence. Then the brands started issuing statements. The makeup company dropped her. The fashion line dropped her. They distanced themselves so fast, it must have given them whiplash. 2 days later, I heard from a neighbor that Tiffany had fled to her parents in Atlanta. She had to leave in the middle of the night because people were protesting outside the apartment she and Preston were crashing at. Her career was over. Her reputation was incinerated. She would never show her face on a screen again without being reminded of what she did. Preston didn't fare much better. With the foreclosure on his record and his gambling debts exposed by the investigation, he lost his real estate license. The brokerage fired him to avoid the scandal. A month later, I was driving past a new housing development on the other side of town. I saw a construction crew pouring concrete for a foundation. One of the laborers looked familiar. He was wearing a neon vest and carrying a heavy hod of wet cement. He looked exhausted. His face was sunburned and dirty. It was Preston. I slowed down. He looked up and our eyes met. For a second, I thought he might come over. I thought he might yell or beg, but he didn't. He just looked at me, then looked down at his boots and kept working. He was finally doing an honest day's work. It was the best lesson I could have ever taught him. I drove away, and I didn't look back. The next few months were a blur of activity. I contacted Galaxy Development, the company Preston had been trying to woo. I told them I owned both lots now, 42 and 44 Oakwood Drive. They were very interested. I negotiated hard. I used the skills I had learned in 40 years of engineering and the confidence Gus had given me. I didn't sell for the lowball offer Preston had tried to secure. I sold for market value plus a premium for the prime location. The final sale price for the combined parcel was $4.8 million. I took the check to Sterling Thorne's office. We set up the transfers. I donated a significant portion to the local animal shelter in honor of Princess, who had fully recovered and been adopted by a nice family in the next town. I donated to the Veterans Fund as Gus had wanted, and then I packed my bags. I stood in the international terminal of the airport. The PA system was announcing flights to Tokyo, London, and Paris. I looked at my reflection in the glass window. I was wearing a charcoal suit tailored to fit perfectly. My shoes were polished. I didn't look like a tired old man anymore. I looked like a man who had reclaimed his life. I held my passport and my boarding pass in my hand. Destination, Rome, Italy. It was the trip Patrice and I had talked about for 40 years. We were always going to go when I retired, when the kids were settled, when we had enough money. We always found a reason to wait. And then she ran out of time. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I walked toward the gate. The attendant smiled at me. "First class, Mr. Bennett. Right this way." I sat in the wide, comfortable seat and accepted a glass of champagne. As the plane taxied down the runway, I looked out at the city disappearing beneath the clouds. I thought about the house on Oakwood Drive. It would be torn down soon. The black fence would be splintered into kindling. The bad memories would be paved over. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver key. I hadn't given it back to Sterling. I kept it as a reminder. Gus was right, I thought, as the engines roared to life, pushing me back into my seat. He told me he was dangerous. He said he was a threat. And he was. He was a time bomb of truth ticking away in the silence of his living room, waiting for the right moment to go off. But he didn't detonate it. He left that to me. I took a sip of champagne and watched the world fall away. I am the one who lit the fuse. I am the one who burned the lies to the ground. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the fire. I was free. No one could hurt me anymore. Because I finally learned that the most dangerous man in the room isn't the one shouting. It is the one who knows the truth and isn't afraid to use it. Goodbye, Preston. Goodbye, Tiffany. Hello, world. This journey teaches us that blood does not grant a license for abuse. Harrison realized that true love sometimes requires the strength to say no and the courage to let grown children face their own consequences. We also learn never to underestimate the quiet ones. Gus showed us that true power isn't about shouting or showing off. It is about patience, observation, and holding on to the truth. Justice may be silent, but it is always watching. If you are being mistreated, remember you are not trapped. You have the power to rewrite your story and reclaim your life. If seeing Preston and Tiffany finally face reality made you cheer, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more stories like this. Have you ever had to stand up to ungrateful family members? Tell me your experience in the comments. I would love to hear from you.